Hi, I'm Julie Zimmerman, and I'm a professor of anthropology at SIUE. We're at the Gehring site here, and I'll take you back through. Well, first of all, let me say about the location of the site. We are here at the base of the bluff. I'm looking off to the east, and I can see the bluff rising over there. For those of you who are familiar with the SIUE campus, I'm directly due west of the Whiteside Cemetery. If you look at the first maps of this area, 1814, the GLO maps show that this land had been deeded to William Bullen Whiteside, and he's buried up there with that spire of a tombstone. So we're directly due west of there. Here's a map or an aerial photo of the Gehring site, and for all you little kids who played soccer at the Y and all you parents who took your kids to soccer at the Y, here's where the Y soccer fields are, right down here. So this is Stadium Road, formerly known as Bluff Road on the SIUE campus. This is Cordy Stadium, and the YMCA soccer fields are here. And then you are probably familiar with that tree line if you have used to park over here. This is the community soccer field. I think it's currently Metro East Soccer plays there. And in the summertime, you will periodically in early summer see our tents back here in this farm field. And this is our site here. It's 11 MS 99, this big red blob. It's about 35 acres in total. Currently, we have this part of it here, about 20 acres is being protected for the archaeology that is on the property there. And the site was found back in the 1960s by archaeologists doing a good old-fashioned surface survey, just walking through plowed farm field and seeing where the artifacts were and what kind of artifacts were there. In the early 1970s, my predecessor, Dr. Sid Denny, and I think that's Sid there, he had a field school. They excavated on the site for several years back in the early 1970s. And here's a photograph from his excavation. And like Jacob said, I've been digging there on and off since 2009. And Dr. Greg Vogel dug there from 2010, 11, 12, I think. But I'm going to be talking about my excavations 2009 and 2013, 14, 16, and 18. Okay, so this is what big picture, this is what we know about the Gehring site so far, based upon excavations and our surface collections. We know that there's just about every time period of that an archaeologist might find in this area is represented at the Gehring site, going back to 10,000 years ago. So most of that is Native American occupation until the 1800s. So this is the oldest. Here, let me move this. This is the oldest artifact found on the site. Here is the base of a stone spear point that dates back to about 10,000 years ago. And this is a representative here. This is a piece of broken pottery. That's the maker's mark with a little unicorn on it. This is from like mid to late 1800s, something like that. So these two artifacts kind of bracket the time periods that are represented on the site, from oldest here to the youngest here. But the time periods of greatest intensity on the site, where people are living there for the longest, maybe even year round at different periods, would be the Middle Woodland occupation from something like 100 BC to AD 350, and the Mississippian period occupation somewhere between AD 1050 and 1400. So we also call Middle Woodland Havana or Hopewell, so you'll hear me use those terms. And I hope that all of our viewers have been to Cahokia, because it's the largest archaeological site north of Mexico, the largest city in the world, arguably at its peak around AD 1200. And so Mississippian time period is when Cahokia is the big city. So these are the two primary occupations at the site. And I'm going to tell you, all archaeologists around here want to do Mississippian, and you can't help it. It's here, it's everywhere. But the time period that really interested me is Middle Woodland period, because we know a lot less about it in this area. What's so interesting about Middle Woodland? That term Hopewell comes from the Hopewell site in Ohio. And you see here on this map, it says Ohio Hopewell.
There's also, so Hopewell refers to, we call it Hopewell Interaction Sphere. It's a big exchange network that existed around 2,000 years ago. And you see the different societies in different colors on this map that engaged in this trade network. And they're exchanging raw materials and some finished goods, but also ideas. Ideas like it's a good thing to build burial mounds. Okay, so this kind of the center some people would see is Ohio Hopewell, but another really important center of like the two big hotspots are Ohio and also what's called Havana Hopewell to the north of us, centered in the Illinois River Valley along here. This map here shows you some of the exotic materials that are being exchanged within this network. And I'm just going to point out copper from the Great Lakes, which they can make into cutouts, and they can soft hammer it into different shapes. Mica is a kind of a shiny mineral that occurs in sheets that's coming from the Carolinas. All the Minecrafters, if kids ages out there, viewers watch you play Minecraft, will be familiar with obsidian. It's volcanic glass, and most of the obsidian is going from is coming from like the Yellowstone area to Ohio, but if a little bit of it lands in Illinois along the way, but the vast majority of it is going into Ohio. Those Ohio Hopewellian people are like obsidian hoarders. Okay, so they're also, Hopewell people are also into other shiny minerals besides the mica, like galena and quartz. So they like shiny stuff, okay? Silver also coming from the Great Lakes. So why do I like Hopewell so much? Why was I so interested in Hopewell? Again, we don't know as much about it here in the American Bottom, which is the area we're in, the Mississippi River floodplain that goes from Alton down to Chester. We don't know as much about it here, but also what's really interesting about Hopewell is these ideas they're exchanging are represented in their artwork. They make this beautiful artwork that shows that they've got some pretty interesting ideas they're communicating. So let me show you here a couple examples of a few of my favorite artifacts from Middle Woodland Period. These are from the Illinois Valley north of us. These are not from the Gehring site. Okay, I wish. All right. So here we have on the right here, two little ceramic bowls. And when I say little, they'd probably fit in your hand, something like this. You can see these are centimeters marked on these scales here. But they're about the size of a typical cereal bowl. Can you see this funny shape outlined on it? This is, well, I'll tell you what it is in a second, but you see it on this image here too. So this is a mussel shell. And I was working in the Illinois State Museum on my dissertation 20 years ago when they found this and came in with it to the museum that day. This is a mussel shell from which the outer layer has all been scraped off to reveal the nacre, the mother of pearl underneath. So it's beautiful, shiny, like a pearl. And then somebody has carved in the same image. What is this thing? It's a kind of a bird. It's a roseate spoonbill. The roseate spoonbill, which is this creature here, if you don't know what I'm talking about, the roseate spoonbill is a bird that is only found like down, they're not here, they don't live here, they're down in the Everglades, that area roughly. I saw roseate spoonbills for the first time in the wild last year when I went to the Everglades for the first time. And it's there. I'm going to tell you, one roseate spoonbill skeleton has been found in a burial mound in the Illinois River Valley. Now, did that roseate spoonbill fly from Florida all the way here? It's possible. Birds get caught on winds and they get way off course, but probably pretty unlikely. Probably that bird, whether it was alive or dead at the time, was traded up here. These bowls are locally made. We know that from the clays that they're made out of. They were made here in Illinois, in the Illinois River Valley. But this shell here, can you see this little tiny projection here? This little tiny projection tells you what species of mussel that is. It is Elliptiospinosa, the Atla-Maha spiny mussel, which only occurs in this one river, the Atla-Maha River of Southeast Georgia, which is where roseate spoonbills are from. So these bowls are locally made by people who've never seen a roseate spoonbill. That roseate spoonbill made its way up here, and people who live here may have never seen a roseate spoonbill, but they wanted that roseate spoonbill, whether alive or dead. But this artifact here, we know came from Georgia, okay? Because mussels don't swim, they just sit there their whole lives. All right. So somebody who lived there carved this in there. What's the big deal about the roseate spoonbill? Why is it so important? Why is it appearing on artifacts from this time period? Well, let me answer that question with looking at this. This is one of my other favorite artifacts from Illinois. This is also from the Illinois River Valley. As you can see, we all recognize beaver, and this is made out of a black stone. And it's just a few inches long. It's about this long. You would smoke this. You would put a tube in here, and you'd pack this with tobacco. They have tobacco. They're growing in their gardens 2,000 years ago. Has come from South America. Besides the fact that this is such a beautifully realistic rendition of this cute little beaver, his eyes are made out of freshwater pearls. His tooth is made out of, guess what? A beaver's tooth. They took a beaver tooth and they carved it and stuck it in there to be his teeth. And so they're smoking it with the tube coming out here. They're looking at this little guy. He's looking in the face while they're smoking this pipe. So what do beavers and roseate spoonbills have in common? They're both diving animals. They dive down into the water. They're earth divers in a Native American mythology. So it's a very common Native American creation story from tribes of the eastern, what's now the eastern United States. I think both Iroquois and Algonquin groups, stories about the earth begins, it's a water world, and to bring earth to this world and make it into the earth that we know, these earth divers swim down one by one into the water to try to retrieve the earth and bring it back up. And in the stories, it's always one animal tries and fails, second animal tries, fails, third animal tries, fails, fourth animal tries, and finally succeeds. And that's how the earth begins, but with this little bit of earth brought back up. And it's usually muskrat is the successful fourth animal. But I have no doubt that when we're looking at these artifacts, these are earth divers. And so when you look at this little cool little pipe, or these artifacts showing that roseate spoonbill, these are telling creation stories. It would be like looking at a picture of Adam and Eve and we all know what that means. Okay, so they're telling stories, and that's what these artifacts represent. All right, so let me point out that all of those artifacts that we just looked at came out of burial mounds, mounds like this in the Illinois River Valley. And so if we look at this map here again, we call this Havana culture, named for the Havana, town of Havana has burial mounds there also in the central Illinois River Valley up near Dixon Mounds Museum if you've been there. And you can see all up and down the Illinois River Valley and the Mississippi River Valley too within this area, there are lots of burial mounds. So within these burial mounds, they're burying people, but they're also burying with them lots of these beautiful works of art and exotic materials coming from all over this trade network area, this Hopewell interaction sphere. Down to the south of us, this is called Crab Orchard. Down to the south of us, a different Hopewell culture, but they're also building burial mounds up along the Kaskaskia River and the Mississippi River to the south of us in the Wabash. But here, where we are in the American bottom, see this red dot here, that is the Gehring site. And you notice, sorry, these maps aren't one map, but there are no burial mounds in this area. So where is the American bottom, this floodplain where we're at of the central Mississippi River Valley? This is the center of the world for Mississippian people, for Cahokians 1,000 years later. In the Middle Woodland Hopewell period, 2,000 years ago, this is kind of a backwater. This is, we're not Havana, we're more like Havana people to the north of us than we are to the Crab Orchard people to the south. But we're kind of like an in-between area where these cultures come together, all right? And we do find some Hopewell materials here, but no burial mounds. There are burial mounds across the river in St. Louis, but not here in the American bottoms. What can we learn about Middle Woodland Hopewell from the Gehring site? Again, this is our site, And I want to emphasize to you, see this little tiny yellow speck here? That's the excavation area that I'm talking about. Okay, so this is 35 acres total, this site. And the area that we have excavated, I forget, it's like less, I don't remember the off the top of my head, it's like less than 2,000 square feet. So we have excavated a tiny little part of the site. And so first, what you're looking at in the map here on the right is showing you the plan of the area where we have excavated. So every year we dig a little area, and so we draw a new map. And so we put these squares together and we can see the site as it's unfolding before us, one little square at a time. So the blue we're going to talk about later is Mississippian period. The red is the Middle Woodland Hopewell stuff that I was most interested in. So I'm first going to talk about these three bigger red circles here and what came out of them. All right. And what are those? Those are, we call them features. They're storage pits. It's where Native Americans 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago, if we're talking about Mississippian, they're digging holes in the ground to store stuff. Okay, so 2,000 years ago, they're storing things like sunflower seeds. They're growing sunflowers in their gardens. They're growing squashes in their garden. If you like zucchini and yellow squash, like I had for lunch today, thank the people who lived here 4,000 years ago, domesticated the ancestors of yellow squash and zucchini right here 4,000 years ago. So they're growing those plants. They love hazelnuts during the Middle Woodland period. So they're storing plant foods in these pits. And when these pits are no longer good for storing plant foods, maybe they get bugs in them or something like that, or the site's abandoned, maybe people come back later. Eventually they start throwing trash in those pits. And so when we find them, they're full of, we are finding plant remains in these pits. I told you not too many animal bones. But they're also full of broken up artifacts, such as what you're seeing here. These are big pieces of pottery sticking out. And so how deep, speaking of dig deeper, how deep do we have to dig? Not deep at all. This site has lost about 5 feet of topsoil since the 1970s because of horseradish agriculture, which is very destructive. And so we're finding these 2,000-year-old features. This is ground surface today, is right here where our cursor is pointing. And so this is just like a foot or so below ground surface. We remove what's been plowed and we'll see a big dark circle and we know this is a storage pit. And so those digging into those, that's where we're finding most of the artifacts. So again, here we can see pottery sticking out of this feature. And here's the pottery that they came out of that feature. So these are the kind of pottery that archaeologists usually find. These are some nice big pieces here. So this is about a foot from top to bottom. Here's my scale down here. Again, these are centimeters in my scale. This piece here is a piece of like this jar here. This is called Havana ware. This is the everyday pottery that they use. This stuff over here is the fancy stuff. This is Hopewell ware. This is from a bowl, but you can see the design on it would be like from this Hopewell jar here. So the Havana ware everyday stuff, they'll put little bumps at the top and they've got cord impressions on it, but otherwise it's undecorated. But the fancy Hopewell stuff, their rituals, sacred ware, they're etching designs into it again, like the roseate spoonbill, like we saw earlier, or in this case, this is some abstract geometric form. Maybe it does represent some kind of animal or cosmological motif that I can't guess today, 2,000 years later. But I want to point out to you, do you see that red in there? That beautiful red paint is preserved 2,000 years later. It's spectacular. And it is incredibly rare. I want to emphasize, it is very rare to find this beautiful red painted Hopewell pottery here in the American Bottom. Up north in the Illinois Valley, they find this pottery mostly in burial mounds, but to find it down here in the American Bottom, in this kind of no man's land in between area, that's pretty unusual. Here's a close-up of that pottery here. You can see the red paint just a little bit better. And here's some of the other artifacts that came out of that pit. Some spear points from that time period, stone spear points. And these are also stone tools here. We call these lamellar blades. They're long, skinny flakes. And we're not sure exactly what they were using them for, but they are specific to this time period. Okay, so those are some of the artifacts that came out of that feature we found back in the summer of 2009.
So we found one Mississippian period house there. We found another Mississippian period house just north of me. And up towards the north end of the field, some distance away, there was another Mississippian house that was found by archaeologist Greg Vogel and his field school crew. So we're looking at a map here of the excavations just that I've done here at the southern end of the site. And what you see in blue is what dates to the Mississippian period. What you see in red is what dates to Middle Woodland Hopewell period, 1,000 years earlier than that. So we have these two Mississippian period houses. The way Mississippians built their houses was they would dig a big rectangular hole in the ground, and it might be like waist deep or something like that. And then they would dig wall trenches, and then they'd slap a wall up and build the structure over that. So what you're looking at basically is like the basement of the house.
So where is our basin here? We have the wall trench. There should be that little basin, or the base, like the hole in the ground should be on top of that. We shouldn't be finding these wall trenches until the bottom of the floor. So where'd the floor go? It was probably, again, plowed away. We estimate 5 feet of topsoil lost since the 1970s. So it's kind of a bummer. If we had dug the site in the 1970s, like Sid Denny did, we would have found a beautiful Mississippian surface, and 5 feet deeper, that Middle Woodland surface would have been intact, unplowed. But unfortunately, now it's almost most of the Mississippian stuff is plowed away, and the Middle Woodland is plowed too. So sometimes it's better not to dig deeper.
Brought you out here to work out here in an archaeological project like this?
Bryce? Well, I'm hoping to do CRM in the future, so this is just practical career experience.
I'm also hoping to do CRM eventually. I'm just, the idea of traveling around to do archaeological work sounds really exciting for me, so that's definitely what I want to do with my career.
Hi, here we are in the archaeology lab in the basement of Peck Hall at SIUE, and we're looking at some of the artifacts I was talking about from the Gehring site. And these have all, you can find photographs of a lot of these on our website. And I mentioned publication in this journal here has photographs of some of this, because this is again the article on the Middle Woodland occupation that was published with a bunch of my students as co-authors, students who worked on senior projects on the Middle Woodland occupation. So I'm going to talk about artifacts from these 3 Middle Woodland features again. In the summer of 2009, we dug this L shape here and excavated this feature 102 and found next to it a post hole, feature 103. So again, I hope this is part of a Middle Woodland house here that we've just uncovered maybe 3 posts from. The reason we dug there from this tiny, we surface collected in the summer of 2009, not just the site, but all the agricultural field that the site sits in. And I don't remember how many acres that was total, something like 50 acres, maybe, I don't remember. And we found over 3,000 artifacts, most of which were lithic debitage, so little flakes from where they're making stone tools and sharpening their stone tools. But down at the southern end of the field, we found a concentration of Middle Woodland pottery, so that's why I started digging at the southern end of the field. And Sid Denny had dug farther north in the field, so I knew I would be away from his excavations down there and wouldn't be running into those. That was an added bonus. But So that first summer I dug this L shape in the near where we found that Middle Woodland pottery, and this red, we found 2 pit features, and I don't think I explained what those pit features are about. It's where Native Americans are digging holes in the ground to store typically plant food. Okay, so Middle Woodland Period, they're storing those native cultigens that we talked about, those the squash and the chenopodium and the sunflower and the knotweed and maygrass and others, and nuts. Middle Woodland people love hazelnuts. We found quite a few hazelnut shell fragments in our samples from the Middle Woodland features, and of course hickory nuts and walnuts, and less frequently sometimes acorns, but not so much. So anyway, they would dig these holes in the ground to store their plant foods, and sometimes they're shallower holes to store artifacts. They might want to keep them hidden till they, if they leave the site for a season or a year and come back later. And then when those storage pits are no longer good for storing plant foods, maybe they've become contaminated with bugs or something like that, then they start throwing their trash in it. So when we find these features, whether it's the storage pits or the house floors, it's because people have thrown their garbage typically into that hole in the ground. And so as a result, it's left, it's full of loose organic materials. I told you they would have lived in this house, and maybe when the soils were depleted, moved away and came back 50 years later. Well, now if they're living here, they start throwing their trash in this old hole where the old house was, right? So as a result of later people's throwing, and it could be, 6 months later, it could be 6 years later, 25 years later, whatever. Later people's coming in and throwing their garbage into those old storage pits and old house foundations. As a result, these features are full of a loose, dark, organic, rich soil and artifacts. Okay, so first I want to talk about the artifacts that came out of this pit here, which is the oldest of the Middle Woodland pits. So here's the everyday pottery that they would have been using. This is called Havana cord marked. It's here's if you can see the cord impressions running down it, and you can see that these are called nodes, these kind of like pimple shapes across the top. So this is the typical everyday pottery that they would be using during early Middle Woodland Period, Middle Woodland Period. But this is identical to pottery that is from the Illinois Valley. Okay. So that's the everyday wear. This is the fancy kind of ceremonial wear. They're using for holidays, using for rituals, and you can see it's got. This is called Hopewell red zoned. You can see engraved lines like this. This would have been a bowl with these engraved zones on the pot, which is what they call it, red zoned, and they've painted within those lines red. So again, this is typical. Here's another piece presumably from the same bowl, and this would be of the rim of a similar series, probably not the same bowl, but maybe a Hopewell jar. This would be the rim of that jar. So the rim usually is the part of the vessel that tells us the most, gives us where the decoration is, that allows us to identify what style and what time period the pottery is. But when you find fancy decorations on even the body sherd, you can identify what the style is. So these are rims from Hopewell. This might be from another bowl. But this is probably from a jar. So this is higher up on the vessel. We can't see. Maybe there's red paint down, and we see the incised lines here. Maybe there would have been red paint over here. This could be coming from the same vessel. But the reason we identify these as Hopewell, again, is the design, but also because they are thinner. The everyday wear, Havana wear, is much thicker. This Hopewell fancy stuff is a very thin walled vessel, and it's tempered with the inclusions that hold the clay together. The temper is limestone on the Hopewell pottery, whereas for the Havana everyday ware, it's crushed up rock and old pots and stuff like that. And it's early stuff. So this fits our model of people migrating from the Illinois Valley to the northern American bottom and then gradually moving south throughout the Middle Woodland period. Also from this feature, besides the pottery, were these lamellar blades. So, and these are just a sample of them. Again, in 30,000 artifacts from the surface of the site, we found lots of lamellar blades. So these are distinctive to the Middle Woodland time period. And a blade is, by definition, a flake that's at least twice as long as is wide. But they're making it in a specific way by taking a stone core and driving these long, linear flakes round and round. And the thought is, when they find these on mortuary sites in the Illinois Valley, they think maybe they're using them for processing dead bodies or something. But here in the American Bottom, they're not found on mortuary sites. This is a habitation site. People are living here. They're not burying their dead here. We have no evidence that where these Middle Woodland people are being buried. Like I said, the burial mounds are up in the Illinois Valley. There are also burial mounds across the river in St. Louis County, maybe St. Charles County. So there are no known Middle Woodland burial mounds in our area. So these are probably being used for something else in this area, unless they're processing the bodies here and taking them somewhere else for burial. Anyway, so the white chert is the local, everyday kind of chert, Burlington chert. That's the common stuff. This gray is a chert that's coming from southern Illinois, Cobden Dongola, which is a very lustrous, high-quality chert. This is also Burlington, like these two, except this has been heat-treated, so it has turned pink, which makes it more lustrous and easier to work. And this is, I could look it up on the tag if I chose to do so. This is an exotic imported shirt also. You can see it's a very high quality, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not a lithic specialist, so I don't remember what that shirt is. And this came from our surface collection. This is a lamellar blade that they refer to as a lizard effigy. And I'm not going to lie, I look at it, I'm like, lizard, really? But if you've seen enough of these, here are the lizard features. Here's the tail towards you. Here's the head towards me. And we see 4 legs, and it looks kind of pregnant. Or maybe it's got a little pot belly. But I know this is it's a lamellar blade. It's made on a lamellar blade, even though I'm not a lithic specialist, because I can see what's called the dorsal ridge, this line running down the length of that blade. So, and then it's also a Burlington chert like these, the local chert. When I say local, maybe it's coming from Alton, maybe from down along like Columbia, Illinois, where you see the bluffs. That's where the outcroppings of chert are. Not here at the SIUE campus. The bluff is very gradual, and the closest chert outcrops are probably Alton. So that was really great stuff. Those were really fantastic finds for our first season. And I was department chair, so I didn't come back out into the field until I was no longer department chair. My term was up in the summer of 2013. So I came back out, and we excavated in this adjacent unit here and up in here, and found this Mississippian wall trench structure. But in the adjacent unit, we found these 2 Middle Woodland features. This one also had Middle Woodland Hopewell pottery in it, but not red painted like this, a later variety of Hopewell fancy pottery in it. And it also had this really cool little figurine in it. So you can see it's about the size of the palm of my hand, and it's kind of unusual. You find figurines in the Middle Woodland period that are like this from the waist up. They call them Casper the Ghost figurines, where they're just like a blob with stumps for arms and a stump for, they have no legs, okay, usually. The Casper the Ghost figurines, like Casper the Ghost from the cartoons, they don't have legs. They just have stumps for arms and no facial features or anything. This one, it's kind of a cone head, but it looks like it may have had a little face that popped off. I'm not saying it had a nose or anything, but the face is broken off, so we can't see if it did have facial features. So that's what Ken Farnsworth tells me, that something like 100 of these Casper the Ghost figurines have been found in the American Bottom, St. Louis area, up into the Illinois Valley, and they typically are found on habitation sites. One has been found in a child's grave, so one theory is that maybe they were toys for kids, and some people think the joke about archaeologists, right, is if we can't explain it, it must be a ritual. I have no opinion on whether or not it's a kid's toy or a ritual item, but I would point out that there are other ritual items coming out of this pit, like the Hopewell pottery and the mica that I will show you in a second. So what's unusual about this for Casper the Ghost figurine is you can see it's got very well-defined legs, which is why this little figurine made the cover of this magazine or journal, because it's special. So it's got very detailed little legs, little pointy feet. It always reminded me of a baby infant wearing sleepers. How they little toes and those little footy, the feet and their little one piece sleepers. Anyway, if you hold it up, you could actually see light between the legs. If you flip it over, so somebody spent a lot of time working on those feet, somebody spent a lot of time working on those legs, somebody spent a lot of time making what's either the bottom of the butt or the backs of the knees, not really clear. And that is more reminiscent of the kind of fancy Middle Woodland figurines, which are very rarely found in the American Bottom because they're usually found in burial mounds, and we don't have burial mounds here. So up in the Illinois Valley and down south of us at the Twinhoffel site, down the southern Mississippi Valley, they find these figurines with they're replicas on display at Cahokia Mounds. They have very detailed facial features, jewelry. You can see their hairstyles. You see their clothing styles, men wearing like a loincloth kind of thing, women wearing like a skirt and topless. You see women like holding their babies, nursing the baby on the back. So again, very detailed legs. So the legs are reminiscent of that style. Those tend to be painted. This one, there's no evidence of paint. So my gut reaction when I saw this was to think, wow, it's like they were trying to make one of those fancy figurines, and they got up to the waist, and they're like, oh, I'm never going to get this right. And then they just finished it off as one of the Casper the Ghost figurines. So it's kind of a hybrid figurine. And again, Ken Farnsworth has been looking at this material since I was an infant, and he'll tell you that, yeah, he's never seen another one quite like this. So interesting find. In about 5 minutes, I think you can find pictures on the SIUE website if you look of the student who found this, and she's very happy after she pulled it out of this pit. And about 5 minutes later, the student was digging along, and I was sitting on my bucket taking notes nearby, and she stood up and she said, Dr. Zimmerman, what's this? And I saw a little speck of flash of light and it's flying by, and it landed 10 feet away. And I ran over there and I picked it up and I grabbed it, and it was the mica. And here, it says not, I don't think it's going to photograph well, but here's some of the mica that came out of that pit. Again, it's, a teaspoon at most. And we only found it in that half that she was working in that day. When we find these features, we bisect them. We draw a line down the middle, cut it in half. We excavate one half, then draw that profile. We've drawn the plan view first, then we draw that profile. So now we've got like 3D picture. We've got the plan view and we've got the profile. Then we dig the other half, and we take our dirt samples to look for flotation samples to look for plant remains and such in the other half. So we only found the mica in that first half. When we got to the second half, we didn't find any mica, and frankly, I wonder if it's not because we had terrible torrential rains over that course of excavation, and I think that there could have been mica in the other half that melted when the water hit it. So anyway, that's special stuff coming out of that pit. That's all I have to say about the Middle Woodland artifacts. The Mississippian, as I mentioned, the artifact sample that we have collected has not been as impressive because these features are so plowed away. However, I have looked at artifacts from private collections that are pretty impressive from the Mississippian occupation as well. So if you know of anybody who has collections from the site from back in the day when it was still plowed, it hasn't been plowed in almost 10 years, but so people have stopped collecting it. But if you know people who have collections who would be willing to let me document what they've got, that's all we want to do is record the information so that we have a better understanding of what happened at the site.